The land out past Cinderbrush doesn't whisper anymore, and used to hum, low and steady when the wind moved through the dry grass or the cattle stirred at dawn. But now, it's just still. The frost comes early and stays late, crusting over cracked soil that groans beneath every boot step. The fences lean like old men, tired from holding up the past. No green out here, no color in the sky. Just bone-gray mornings and silence so thick it presses against your chest. There's a place just off the old trade road, barely a ranch really, where a man named Jonas Hale still gets up before light breaks. No one asks him to. There's no one to ask anything of him anymore. He's been alone for 6 winters now. Just him, the land, and the cold. Jonas is a man carved out of habit. War turned him into someone who could carry weight without speaking of it, and grief made sure he never tried. He built the house with his own hands, the barn too, dug a well, raised fences, ran cattle when there were cattle to run. Brought his wife here once, back when he believed in things like a future. She carried their child on her hip, laughing at the wind and calling it freedom. Both of them were gone by the end of that winter. Fever took 'em fast, and since then Jonas has lived like a shadow that forgot it used to follow someone. Now he fixes what breaks, pumps, latches, chicken wire, eats when hungry, sleeps when he can, says little, hears even less. His world narrowed down a routine because routine doesn't leave room for grief. But something changed the morning she appeared. I want you to picture this. A figure on foot, far down a frozen dirt road, moving slow, unsteady, carrying something bundled close. No wagon, no horse, just boots grinding into frost-bitten earth. The kind of walk that tells you this person has run out of every other option. Jonas watched her from the porch. Didn't move, just stared like a man looking at a ghost. And maybe in a way she was one. Her dress was dust-covered and thin, tied at the waist with a piece of string. Her hair pinned back like it had been done days ago and never touched since. Lips cracked, skin pale, eyes brown, sunken, alert in that way people get when they're holding it all together by a thread. And in her arms, a child. Still, too still. She didn't beg, didn't drop to her knees or cry out. She walked up to the gate, knocked once with the back of her knuckle, and stood like she meant to be seen. And maybe that's what struck him. She didn't carry herself like someone asking for help. She carried herself like someone making a deal. I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where the air feels heavier, where time goes quiet and something shifts deep inside you. But for Jonas, that was it. That frozen moment. That woman at his fence, that child against her chest. He stepped down from the porch, slowly. Not because he was scared, but because he didn't understand what he was walking toward. She didn't wait for him to speak. "I ain't here for charity," she said, voice raw like it hadn't been used in days. "I work, milk cows, clean stalls, patch what needs patching. You don't gotta be kind, just give him something to eat." She adjusted the boy higher on her chest, pale, thin, his little head lolled against her collarbone. Jonas didn't answer right away. He just looked at her. Really looked. No tracks behind her, no wagon wheels, no signs of anyone else. Just her, just the boy, and whatever they were running from. "What's your name?" he asked, and his voice sounded lower than usual, like it had been asleep. "Eda Brooks," she said. "His name's Tal." He looked past her. No one coming. No cavalry. No rescue. "Where you coming from?" "Mizzou," she said. "Walked most of it, rode some. Don't matter now." There's something about the way people talk when they've run out of future. The past doesn't matter. The path behind is just a series of bad choices and burned bridges. All that's left is forward, and even that's uncertain. Jonas had every reason to turn her away. A stranger, a burden, a woman with bruises she wasn't explaining, and a child that looked more ghost than boy. But he didn't. "You can sleep in the barn," he said. "It's dry." She nodded, not grateful, not surprised, just like she'd struck a deal. And maybe that's what it was. He opened the gate. She stepped through, one hand still wrapped tight around the boy's back. They didn't say much walking to the barn, just the sound of boots crunching over frozen dirt. The door creaked as Jonas pushed it open. The air inside smelled like hay and old work. He lit the lantern. That's when he saw her face fully for the first time. Sharp cheekbones, a bruise along her jaw, lips split like they'd bled and healed wrong. She laid the child down on the cot like he was made of glass, then sat beside him, back against the wall, and let her body fall slack like her strength had finally run out. Jonas brought her 2 blankets and a chip bowl of potatoes. She didn't say thank you, just fed the boy, small pieces, gentle coaxing, movements practiced like she'd done this 1,000 times already. He didn't ask what she was running from. The bruises told enough of that story. "You need anything else?" he asked. She looked up, eyes tired but clear. No. And that was that. That night, Jonas set a second tin cup on the table, just in case. He didn't go upstairs to the attic, didn't look at the cradle gathering dust. But he didn't ignore it either. There's something about witnessing someone who refuses to break that stays with you. Something in the way Ida didn't ask for pity, didn't flinch, didn't lie. She wasn't just surviving, she was choosing to survive. And for a man who hadn't heard laughter in years, hadn't poured a second cup of coffee in just as long, that choice meant something. Maybe it meant he could choose too. She showed up on foot. No wagon, no horse, no trail of dust behind her. Just boots grinding slow in the frozen dirt, and a silence that felt too heavy for someone still breathing. It was mid-morning, but the light never really came out that day. The sky was a dull sheet of gray, and the frost hadn't lifted since before dawn. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it sinks in, settles in your joints, makes you forget what warmth ever felt like. Jonas Hale stood on his porch, coat unbuttoned like he didn't care if the cold took him too. That's just who he'd become, a man too familiar with loss to flinch at weather. And then he saw her. She looked just like Jonas had seen her from the porch, worn thin by travel, something in her shoulders drawn tight like she'd braced for too many days. The child in her arms slept soundly, unaware of the cold or the weight she carried, not just in her arms, but in her whole body. And in her arms, a child. You could tell right away the boy wasn't awake. His head rested against her collarbone, limp, too quiet for his age. He couldn't have been older than 2. His little hand was curled up in the fabric of her dress like it had always been there, like he didn't know how to let go anymore. She walked straight to the gate, not desperate, not begging, just deliberate, like she'd thought this through, like this was her last card and she wasn't going to waste it on pride. She raised one hand and knocked, not loud, just once, with the back of her knuckle. Jonas didn't move, not right away. It had been years since anyone had come down that road who wasn't lost or selling something, and this woman wasn't either. She didn't look lost. She looked like she knew exactly where she was going, even if she had no idea what she'd find. Maybe that's what made him step forward. I keep thinking about that moment, that stillness, that space between her knock and his first step. Have you ever had one of those moments where you just know something's about to change? Not loud, not explosive, just deeply. He crossed the yard slow, cautious. Not fearful, just trying to understand what he was walking toward. She didn't wait for him to speak. "I ain't here for charity," she said. Her voice was raw, like it had been kept in her throat too long. "I work, milk cows, clean stalls, patch clothes, cook. You don't got to be kind. Just give 'em something to eat." She adjusted the child higher on her chest, and that's when Jonas really saw him. Skin tied over his cheeks, pale, head bobbing loosely like it had grown too heavy. That kind of sick that comes from too many skipped meals and too many nights in the cold. Jonas didn't speak for a moment, just stood there looking at her, measuring what he was seeing against the years of silence he'd wrapped around himself. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Ida Brooks. His name's Cal." There was a long pause. He looked past her, nothing behind. No tracks, no shadow. Just this woman, this child, and whatever fire had carried her this far. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "Mizzou. Walked most of it, rode some. Don't matter now." And somehow it didn't. Because whatever she had walked from, she'd made it here. Jonas remembered things he hadn't let himself remember in years, like the way his son looked the night the fever took hold, how light he felt in his arms, how the cradle upstairs stayed full of dust because there was no one left to fill it. He looked at her again, not with pity, not even with curiosity, just something quieter. He said, "You can sleep in the barn. It's dry." Ida nodded once. Not grateful, not soft, just like she was accepting terms to a deal, like she expected nothing and was prepared to make the most of it. He opened the gate. She stepped through. "You know, I think there's a kind of strength most people never see. It's not loud. It doesn't come with declarations or demands. It shows up quietly, on foot, with a child too light and a will that refuses to break. That's what she had. Not pride, because pride would have gotten her killed, but dignity, the kind that makes a person stand tall even when they've got nothing left." They didn't speak on the way to the barn, just the sound of boots over frost-bitten earth. When Jonas opened the door, the old wooden hinge groaned like it hadn't been moved in years. Inside smelled of hay, leather, and animal breath. Cold, yes, but not cruel. There was a cot in the corner, worn but clean enough. Ida laid the child down like he was porcelain, checked his blanket, adjusted a small ragged doll at his side. Then she sat beside him, her back against the wall, and let her whole body sink, like she finally let herself feel the exhaustion that had been waiting for permission. Jonas didn't ask questions. He just brought 2 blankets and a bowl of boiled potatoes from his own kitchen. She took them without a word, fed the boy first, breaking off pieces small enough for his dry mouth to manage. Her hands were careful, movements practiced. This wasn't the first time, not by a long shot. Jonas stood by the door and watched for a moment. There was something about the way she moved that stuck with him. Not the limp or the silence, but the purpose. She was still fighting, and sometimes just refusing to fall is a kind of miracle. "You need anything else?" he asked. Her eyes found his. No. That night he didn't sleep much, not because he was afraid, but because something had shifted. The porch light flickered in the wind. The second coffee cup sat on the table. The attic stayed closed, but his hand brushed the stair rail once, then pulled away. Ida Brooks hadn't asked for his help, but somehow she'd pulled him back into the world. And that, well, that was the beginning.
The thing about healing is, it rarely looks like what we expect. It doesn't arrive wrapped in clarity or light. It sneaks in through repetition, through boiling water, folding laundry, splitting wood. In this case, it showed up in the sound of wash water sloshing against a tin basin behind an old farmhouse, a woman's red hands wringing out cold clothes in the sharp morning wind. No complaint, no noise but the rhythm of her breath. Ida didn't ask what needed doing. She simply did. Every morning, before the sun had cleared the frost from the barn roof, she was moving. Quiet, purposeful, filling the stove, sorting beans by hand, wiping ash from the hearth with an old rag until her knuckles turned pink from the cold. The child, Cal, was never far. Still too weak to walk, he spent most of the day bundled on a blanket near the fire. Sometimes he dozed, rabbit doll clutched tight. Other times he simply watched her. That alone said something. That trust a child gives only when he's seen worse and recognizes safety when it finally arrives. Jonas watched all this from the side. At first, it was just observation, a habit of survival. You learn to read people without needing words. But something shifted. Not all at once, more like a thaw. He noticed how she moved slower in the evenings, limping just a bit more each day. He saw how she winced when she bent to stir the pot, and when she tried to stand from the hearth one night and stumbled into the wood bin, he caught her by the elbow before she could hit the ground. "I'm fine," she said quickly, reflex almost. "No, you ain't." It was the first time he heard his own voice carry weight for someone else in years. She tried to pull away. He didn't let go. "Take the boot off." She hesitated. Pride, fear, both. But then she sat, unlaced it slow, and let him see. The bruising was bad, deep, skin angry and swollen, a cut at the ankle gone half infected from days of walking on it without care. "How long's it been like this?" he asked. "A few days." Jonas didn't answer. He just got up, brought warm water, a strip of clean cloth, and an old tin of salve, sat back down, and started cleaning the wound without ceremony. She didn't flinch, didn't say thank you, but she let him. I keep thinking about that moment, not because it was grand, but because of what it wasn't. There was no music, no confession, just two people, damaged but alive, sharing the kind of silence that makes room for something new. While he cleaned her leg, Cal stirred on the cot, let out a soft cough. Ida turned quickly, half rising. Jonas put a hand on her shoulder, he said. "I got him." She paused, let herself trust him. He picked the boy up carefully, light as a bundle of kindling, felt the heat in the child's breath, the way his arms clung gently to his shirt. "Boy's tough," Jonas muttered. "He don't know he's allowed to give up," Ida replied. Her voice was soft, but sure. That night, after Cal was asleep, they sat by the stove. Jonas in his chair, Ida curled in a blanket on the floor nearby. She asked if he'd had family once. He nodded. Wife. Son. Gone. 6 years. She didn't apologize, didn't lower her eyes, just nodded, like she understood something about loss that words couldn't touch. Then she told him. Cal had a brother and sister. Lost both the same week. Fever, she said. Couldn't get help fast enough. After that, she started moving. Just moving. Not planning, not hoping, just running from anything that looked like permanence. And maybe that's what hit hardest for Jonas. Because he wasn't much different. He hadn't run, sure, but staying in place can be its own kind of escape. Hiding behind routine, letting the house quiet itself into nothingness, dust collecting on a cradle no one visited anymore. "I ain't losing him too," she said, eyes fixed on the boy. Jonas didn't respond, just stood, went to the cupboard, and brought her another blanket. She took it in silence, held it close like it meant something more than warmth. From that night on, something shifted, Not in a loud, dramatic way, but you could feel it. Jonas started setting 2 plates for supper. Ida didn't hesitate when she saw them. She fed Cal first, then herself. No small talk, no ceremony, just shared space, shared effort. Sometimes, that's all you need. She kept working, scrubbing, mending, organizing the pantry with soldier-like order, but now she'd ask simple things like, "Where's the axe kept?" or "How much feed's left in the bin?" Practical questions, but they meant she'd stopped seeing herself as temporary. She'd started belonging. Jonas found himself watching the way she tucked Cal in, how she always placed the little rabbit on his chest like it was armor. The care wasn't performative, it was habitual, protective in the quietest ways. And Cal, he got better. First, he laughed, just once, but it echoed through the house like a bell that had gone silent for years. Then, he stood. Wobbly at first, clinging to furniture like a sailor on land, but he stood. Ida smiled when he did. Not wide, not bright, but real. The kind of smile that only shows up when you forgot you had any left. I don't know if you've ever lived with that kind of silence, the kind that presses down on you, makes you forget the sound of someone else's footsteps, the clatter of a second plate, the rhythm of life shared. But when it returns, when someone fills those empty spaces again, it feels like something bigger than healing. It feels like beginning. That's what was happening here. Not fast, not perfect, but real. And for Jonas, who hadn't trusted anything in years, it was enough.
Sometimes the past doesn't knock. It just slips under the door when you're not looking. It was the 7th morning since Ida had arrived. The frost was still thick on the windows. Jonas was at the table, nursing black coffee in a tin cup, same way he had every morning for years. But that day, there was something else. An envelope. No return address. Just heavy handwriting across the front. He almost didn't open it. Mail rarely mattered out here. But instinct, call it old soldier's habit, told him to look closer. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Seen a woman and child heading west. Calico dress. Brown hair. Might be yours. Keep looking. She's worth money. No name, no signature. Just that. Jonas folded the letter quietly and slipped it into his coat pocket. He didn't tell Ida. Not right away. He needed time to think, time to feel. But something in him twisted, that old instinct again, the one that learned to read movements before they meant danger. It was back, awake, pacing. That afternoon he sat on the porch sharpening a blade, not because it needed it, but because his hands couldn't be still. His eyes stayed on the road. And when Ida came around the back of the house, wiping her hands on her skirt, her limp more noticeable than usual, he finally spoke. "You ever figure someone might come looking for you?" She froze, spoon still in hand. The wind kicked up between them, scattering loose straw across the dirt. She didn't turn right away, but when she did, her voice didn't tremble. "I figured someone would, but I was counting on being hard to find." Jonas nodded, once. "Got a letter today. Said someone saw you. Said you were worth money." There was a long pause, the kind that feels like two people standing at the edge of something they can't quite see yet. She didn't ask to see the letter. She didn't ask who sent it. Instead, she looked him in the eye and said, "That was his brother." Jonas didn't move. "They ran cattle, but they ran other things too. I saw something I shouldn't have, and he wanted to trade me, to square a debt. Her jaw tightened. Said the boy was leverage. It's a strange thing hearing someone speak their truth like it's just another line in a long to-do list. No tears, no drama, just facts. I think sometimes that's what survival does to people. It burns the softness out, leaves only the hard edges, the things you cling to when everything else has been taken. Jonas studied her face, the scar near her temple, the way her shoulders stayed squared, even now. He didn't need to ask anything else. I can keep moving, she said quietly. Leave tomorrow. Just let me take some bread. I'll carry him best I can. No, Jonas said. She blinked, like she wasn't sure she heard him right. You stay, he repeated. This place is far, quiet. If anyone comes, I'll handle it. And right there, something broke loose between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. That they had both seen darkness, and that maybe now they were willing to hold a light for each other. Why would you do that? She asked. Jonas didn't answer right away. Because you showed up and didn't ask for pity. Because that boy laughs now. Because I ain't had reason to check the damn mail in 2 years. Her hand shook just a little. Not from fear, but from something else. The fragile beginnings of safety. A thing that feels almost unfamiliar after too long on the run. I don't want you hurt. Not over me. Jonas looked at her, steady. You and that boy, you're not trouble. You're someone who ain't had a fair shot yet. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. Of what had been said, of what still didn't need to be said. That night, Ida didn't sit by the door. She sat by the fire. Her hair was damp from a basin rinse. Her shirt hung loose around her shoulders. She looked almost rested. Did you love your wife? Jonas nodded. I did. What happened? She bled out. Took too long in labor. I held the baby an hour before he stopped breathing. Ida didn't speak for a long time. Cal had a brother and a sister. Fever took both, same week. He stopped thinking after that. Just start moving. Jonas didn't interrupt. But the day he raised his hand toward Cal, I ran. Didn't think, just moved. You did right. You got him out. She looked over at the boy, asleep on the rug with the rabbit tucked under his arm. For a moment, her face softened just enough to let something tender show through. Sometimes I worry it's too late for me, that I'll never be someone whole again. Jonas leaned forward slightly, voice low, certain. You don't need to be whole. You just need to stay. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away. Later, after she had gone to bed, Jonas sat by the window. The rifle leaned within reach, not from fear, but from readiness. That letter hadn't scared him. It had focused him. For the first time in years, he had something worth protecting again. And this time, he wasn't going to lose it.
Some men come with law in their hands. Others come with lies in their pockets and a revolver on their hip. And they expect both to carry the same weight. Samuel Kincaid rode in just after noon. Gray wool coat, gloves too clean for a man who'd ever worked the land. He sat high in the saddle, posture straight, like someone used to walking into rooms where his money spoke before he had to. He didn't come alone. Behind him was another rider, broader, heavier, hat pulled low, gun swinging loose at his side. The kind of man paid more to intimidate than to speak. Jonas heard them before he saw them. The clop of hooves over hard frost, the way silence changed when strangers crossed it. He stepped out onto the porch slowly. Didn't rush. He didn't need to. Kincaid dismounted with practiced ease, brushed imaginary dust from his sleeve, smiled. "Mr. Hale, I presume?" Jonas didn't answer, just stared. "You've got something of mine," Kincaid said. "A woman, a child. She took something that doesn't belong to her." At that moment, Ida stepped into view behind Jonas, standing still in the doorway. Her face was pale, but calm. She didn't hide, didn't run. "I'm not yours," she said quietly. Kincaid's smile didn't fade, but it shifted, turned sharp. "You broke a contract, Ida, left debt behind. That boy's not yours to keep." Jonas stepped down from the porch, boots crunching hard into the frozen dirt. His voice was low, measured. "She didn't take anything," he said. "She took herself." Kincaid's man adjusted his stance, hand inching toward the holster. Jonas didn't flinch. "I fought in the war. You draw first, you don't walk away." For a breath, no one moved. Then Kincaid raised a hand to stop his man. "This isn't finished," he said, turning toward his horse. "The law might be slow, but it'll get here." Jonas took a step closer. "You set foot on this land again," he said. "I'll show you how fast my law works." They rode off without another word, but no one inside the house exhaled. I've always believed silence can say more than shouting, and that day silence said this: "He'll be back." That night the wind picked up. Snow blew sideways across the hills, coating everything in white that didn't feel clean. It felt like a warning. Jonas checked the locks twice, moved the rifle closer to the door. Not paranoia, preparation. There's a difference. Ida didn't sleep. She sat in the rocker near the window, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the dark. "I didn't think he'd let it go that easy," she said. "He didn't," Jonas replied. The days that followed felt like holding your breath underwater. Every sunrise was thin and gray. Every knock of wood or shift of wind felt like a signal. Have you ever lived like that? Waiting for something to return? Something you know isn't done with you yet? There's a tension in that kind of waiting. It settles into your spine. It makes you move quieter, speak shorter. Not because you're scared, but because you're conserving strength for what's coming. Jonas walked the perimeter each morning, checked the barn doors, reinforced the fence post nearest the gate. He kept his coat hung by the door, boots always dry, rifle always loaded. Inside, Ida did the same in her own way. She boiled extra water, repacked supplies, made sure cows' clothes were layered and clean. Every small action was its own kind of armor. They didn't speak of it much, not out loud, but everything between them said the same thing: be ready. One night, as the fire cracked low and the child slept warm in the back room, Ida spoke. "You ever wonder what happens after?" Jonas looked up. "After what?" "After he comes back. If we make it through the winter. What then?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He looked into the fire like maybe it had something to offer. "Then we live," he said. She turned the tin cup in her hands slowly. "I don't know if I remember how to do that." "You will. It takes time." The truth is, healing doesn't always wait until danger's gone. Sometimes it starts while the storm is still building. That's the strange part. How people can begin to mend even when their world isn't safe yet. How something in them decides, I'm tired of just surviving. But make no mistake, survival still matters. Jonas watched that week, always listening, always still. He didn't pace, he didn't rant, he just watched. He remembered how the war taught him that fear isn't loud, it's quiet. It moves in the way someone shifts their chair, in the pause before they speak, in the way they keep looking at the road even when they're smiling. And he saw that in her too. Ida didn't stop working, but she started moving like someone who knew this place might not hold, like someone who knew peace, if it came, would have to be earned. One night she stood by the stove and asked, "Why are you doing this? Really?" Jonas didn't look up right away. "Because you matter. Because he doesn't get to win." And for the first time, her shoulders lowered. Not in surrender, but in relief. So many people carry battles long after the war ends. Maybe you've known someone like that. Maybe you are someone like that. Someone still looking over their shoulder, still bracing for something to be taken from them. But here's what I've learned. When someone finally chooses to stand beside you, not in front of you, not behind you, but with you, that's when things begin to change. And that's where they were now. Not in the clear, not out of danger, but no longer alone. And that's the start of every good fight worth taking.
Some truths are so raw, so quietly brave. They don't need to be shouted to shake a room. They just need to be spoken, clearly, plainly, and without apology. The morning they rode into town, the frost hadn't lifted. The road was hard, bitter under hoof. Jonas had tucked Cal in close between them, wrapped in an old army coat, the boy's breath fogging into the scarf near his chin. Ida rode behind, eyes set forward, jaw locked against the cold. They didn't speak much on the way. There wasn't much left to say. Because when you're riding into something that might decide the rest of your life, you carry your silence like armor. The courthouse wasn't much, just a room behind what used to be the bank. The judge, Ambrose Lott, had already arrived. Word was he was fair when he wanted to be, but money made him lean if you didn't watch close. And Samuel Kincaid was already there. Pressed coat, polished boots, two men flanking him like bad intentions in expensive hats. Jonas saw Ida hesitate for just a second, a flicker, the way her hand tightened around Cal's shoulder, but then she stepped forward, holding the boy tight, her spine straight. Inside it was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every shift of a chair sound louder than it should. "Mr. Kincaid," the judge said, not looking up from his papers, "state your claim." Kincaid stood slowly, spoke like a man used to having rooms lean toward him. "She entered into a labor contract with my family, broke it, took my brother's ward, the child, and fled. I seek return of property and compensation for breach." I don't know if you've ever been in a place where someone called another human being property, where they said it so easily, so confidently, you almost had to remind yourself what century you were standing in. Ida flinched. Barely, but Jonas saw it. "Do you have the contract?" the judge asked. Kincaid handed it over. A folded sheet, neat, signed and stamped. Looked real enough. Then the judge turned to Ida. "Mrs. Brooks, how do you respond?" She stepped forward. She didn't shake. She didn't lower her voice. "I signed a labor agreement, not a sale. The judge looked at her over his glasses. They didn't keep their end. They beat me. Starved my boy. They tried to trade me like a mule. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. When I left, I wasn't fleeing a contract. I was escaping being trafficked. Any witnesses? The judge asked. No, she said. Just scars. And a child who was wasting away. She turned to look at Cal, still asleep, rabbit tucked in the crook of his arm, then looked back, eyes steady. I didn't steal anything. I saved my son. Jonas stood then. I saw her when she arrived. The boy could barely lift his head. She didn't ask for charity. She offered work, and she's earned every bite with her hands. The judge eyed him. You kin? No, sir. But I buried my own once. I know what grief looks like, and I know what courage looks like too. This ain't a thief. This is a mother who didn't quit. Con Kincaid leaned forward them, lips tight. I have signatures. She has no proof. And that was when Ida stepped forward one last time. Just a half step, but the weight of it. God, you could feel it. I don't have papers, but I have this child. And I will die before I hand him to a man who sees him as leverage. You could hear the breath leave that room. The judge sat back in his chair, looked at her a long while, then at Con Kincaid, then at the folded paper in his hand. This court does not recognize ownership of persons. He paused. If you wish to pursue charges, you may do so in the next district. Until then, your claim is denied. Con Kincaid's face flushed dark. One more thing, the judge added, voice lower now. If I hear you attempt to reclaim this woman or her child without legal standing, I will see you brought up for harassment and fraud. The room didn't move. Con Kincaid said nothing, just turned on his heel and walked out. Jonas didn't breathe until the door shut behind him. Ida just stood there. Not triumphant, not glowing, just still. Then, only then, her shoulders dropped. The kind of release that only comes after years of bracing for a blow that didn't land. Outside, the sun had come through the clouds. Just barely, but it was there. And the wind wasn't as sharp as it had been on the way in. Cal stirred, blinked up at her, and smiled. And she kissed the top of his head and looked at Jonas. You think he'll come back? She asked. Jonas had shook his head. Not after that, he said. He lost his leverage, and he knows it. She was quiet for a long moment. I've never won anything before. Jonas looked at her calm. You didn't win. You survived. And now, you get to live. And as they rode back to the ranch, snow melting along the edges of the road, the land didn't look so hard anymore. Same trees, same fences, same sky, but the weight was different. The danger hadn't made her. The courtroom hadn't saved her. She did. By standing up, by telling the truth, by refusing to be erased. And Jonas, he'd stood with her. Not because he had to, but because somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the years of dust and silence, something had stirred back to life. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone.
There's a kind of quiet that follows a storm. Not the silence of fear or stillness, but something softer, the kind that lets you hear your own breath again. Ida rode back with Cal bundled tight against her chest. The child was asleep, small fingers curled in his blanket, head resting on her collarbone like it had always belonged there. The road home looked the same, snow dusted along the fence rails, bare trees reaching into a pale sky, but to her, it felt entirely different. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. She kept glancing at Jonas, riding beside her. His posture was the same, steady, alert, but something in his face had softened. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but she did. Maybe because she had stopped expecting people to protect her. And now, here was a man who hadn't promised safety, but had become it anyway. At one point, she said it out loud, quiet, like she was still testing how it felt in her mouth. Ida whispered, "Maybe for the first time, I don't feel like I've lost." Jonas nodded. "You survived. Now it's time to start living." She blinked, looked down at Cal, at her hands raw from cold and rope and truth told under oath. Then Jonas added, "You survived, and now you get to live." There's a difference between winning and surviving. Winning is about being better than someone else. Surviving is about refusing to disappear. I don't know if you've ever had to fight for your own story. Not with fists, not even with words, but with endurance, with staying put, with saying, "No more." Maybe it's a courtroom. Maybe it's a hospital. Maybe it's just a dinner table where someone tries to erase who you are. But survival, that's a victory with a quieter kind of echo. When they reached the house, Jonas dismounted first, helped Ida down, gently taking Cal into his arms. The boy stirred, blinked at the light, then tucked himself into Jonas's coat like he belonged there. And maybe he did now. Inside, the fire had kept burning. The house smelled like ash, pine, and something new, warmth that didn't come from the stove. There was bread on the counter, 2 plates waiting on the table. Jonas had set them out that morning before they left, like he knew they'd be back. Ida paused in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room like she was still unsure if it was real. Jonas turned. "Sit down," he said. "You're home." She didn't move right away. Then, slowly, she pulled off her coat, set it neatly on the chair, and sat across from him. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with presence. For the first time, she wasn't perching like a guest ready to leave. She was staying. You know, I think we underestimate what staying really means. We talk a lot about leaving, when to walk away, when to run, how to cut ties, but sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stay. Stay where it hurts. Stay where healing feels slow. Stay where the ground is unfamiliar, but safe enough to plant something in. That night, after supper, Jonas checked the locks as usual. Ida stayed by the fire, Cal asleep beside her, Rabbit doll resting on his chest. She didn't speak for a while, just watched the flames shift and settle. Then, without looking up, she said, "I'm not leaving." Jonas didn't say anything. He just nodded once, then sat across from her in the old rocker, arms resting on the worn wood, the way he had so many nights before. Only now he wasn't alone. He didn't say it out loud, but maybe he didn't have to. Good. No more running. And maybe that's what this story has been about all along. Not rescue, not redemption, but recognition. Two people, broken in different ways, finding the quiet courage to stay put, to fight not just for survival, but for the right to belong. I think about that a lot, especially these days when so many of us feel unrooted, unseen, when trust feels fragile and safety feels like something reserved for other people. But here's what this story reminds me of, that even after loss, after betrayal, after all the maps you followed led to nowhere, there is still a road back. And sometimes that road ends in a quiet house, a warm fire, and someone who doesn't ask you to prove your worth. They just set an extra plate at the table. And that, my friend, might be the rarest kind of beginning. Because it's not born from rescue. It's born from refusal. Refusal to give up. Refusal to let someone rewrite your life. Refusal to keep running. And maybe if you've been through something lately, or are going through it now, you know exactly what that kind of strength feels like. It's not loud. It doesn't shout from the rooftops. It doesn't post pictures online. It folds a blanket. It checks the locks. It lets someone hold your child while you rest for the first time in weeks. It says, "You don't owe me anything, but I'll stand with you anyway." That's what Jonas gave Ida. That's what she gave back. And that's the kind of story that lingers, the kind you don't forget. Because sometimes, just surviving is the greatest beginning.
There's a quiet moment, one you can't plan for, can't force, when a place stops feeling borrowed and starts feeling like home. For Ida, that moment didn't come all at once. It wasn't a celebration or a sunrise or some poetic turning of the page. It came in small pieces, folding laundry that wasn't just hers, stirring stew in a pot that had once belonged to someone else's wife, hearing Cal laugh, really laugh, at something Jonas said over supper. It came in the absence of fear. No more bags half-packed by the door, no more flinches at the sound of boots on gravel, no more questions whispered into the night about whether they'd be forced to run again. I think sometimes healing doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like washing dishes side by side in silence, or hanging a coat on a hook without thinking about when you'll need to grab it again. That winter settled in slowly, thick snow along the fence line, days so short you barely had time to finish chores before the sky dimmed again. But inside that small farmhouse, warmth took root. Ida stopped asking what she owed. She stopped offering to sleep in the barn or take less food. One morning she simply reached for the second mug on the shelf, Jonas's mug, and poured him coffee like she'd done it every day of her life. He didn't blink, just said thanks, and passed her the last slice of toast. And something in that moment clicked into place. Later that week, after supper, Cal had fallen asleep on the rug again, one boot still on, rabbit tucked under one arm, and Jonas was tending the fire. Ida stood in the doorway, arms folded lightly, watching the flames curl and settle. And then she said it. Not dramatic, not heavy. "Feels like I belong now." Jonas didn't turn, just nodded. "You do." She hesitated, then added, "I used to think I'd always be someone's burden." Jonas poked the coals gently, then finally turned. "Not here. This is your home now. You don't owe rent on peace." That line, "you don't owe rent on peace," has stayed with me ever since I first heard it. Because how many of us walk through life thinking we have to earn safety, that we have to apologize for needing rest, for needing room to rebuild? I remember once, years ago, after a hard season in my own life, broken friendships, health scares, everything just spinning, I moved into a little rental with 2 mismatched chairs and a kettle that whistled too loud. And for weeks I kept thinking, I shouldn't get used to this. I shouldn't settle in. Something bad's bound to happen again. But then, one morning, I made toast, and for the first time in months, I didn't flinch at the silence. I sat down, ate slowly, looked around and thought, I'm not running anymore. That's what Ida found there. A stillness she could trust.
And maybe that's the most radical thing a person can do after trauma. Not build walls higher, not become colder, but allow warmth back in. Jonas had changed too, quietly, subtly, but Ida saw it. He stopped sitting on the porch alone at dusk, started asking her about her day even when there wasn't much to say. When Cal had a cough that lingered for a week, it was Jonas who rode through the snow to fetch herbs from the next town over. 3 hours there, 3 hours back, just to be sure. And one night, when a coyote howled close to the barn, Jonas got up without a word, rifle in hand. But he didn't just check the gate. He came back inside, tucked the blanket tighter around Cal, and sat near the boy until he was sure everything was safe. Ida watched from the hallway, said nothing, but in her chest, something settled. This was what family looked like, not chosen by blood, but by choice, over and over, day by day. And maybe that's the truth we don't say enough. Family is the people who stay. One night, near the end of winter, as they sat around the fire, Jonas cleaning a bridle, Ida mending a hem, Cal asleep between them, Jonas looked up and said, without fanfare, "Spring's coming." Ida smiled. "I believe it." He paused, then added, "Things'll change. The land'll need tending, barn needs repairs, chickens maybe, a dog if we can find one." Ida set down her needle, looked at him. "You making a list?" He shrugged. "Just thinking out loud. Lot to do when you're not running anymore." She didn't speak for a moment, then, "I'd like that. Staying, planting something, watching it grow." Jonas nodded. "Then we'll do that." And that was it. No big promises, no grand declarations. Just two people, weary and weathered, deciding to stay, to build, to believe in a future that didn't require escape. So if you've made it this far in the story, maybe you're carrying something too, a memory, a scar, a part of yourself that wonders if it'll ever feel safe enough to stay. Let this be your reminder, you're not alone. There is a life beyond survival. There is warmth after the frost. And somewhere, out there or in here, there's a place where someone will set an extra mug on the table and say, "This is your home now," and mean it.
There are stories that end with a wedding, or a war, or a win. But this one ends quietly, with the sound of chickens in the yard, the creak of a rocking chair, the low laugh of a child echoing off the porch. It ends with a woman who no longer hides, a man who no longer drifts, and a boy who sleeps through the night without fear. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most extraordinary kind of ending there is. By the time spring pushed through the ground, hesitant but steady, the land around the ranch had softened. The snow melted in streaks down the hill. Patches of green peeked through. A hawk returned to the fence post it always used, as if nothing had changed, and yet somehow everything had. Ada had taken to humming while she worked, sometimes while kneading dough, sometimes while hanging laundry, her sleeves rolled up and hair tied back, face flush in the morning sun. It wasn't a song anyone recognized, maybe one she made up, but it sounded like belonging. Jonas had started building again. Not repairs, not just survival. He put up a new chicken coop, talked about planting beans and squash, not because they needed to, but because it felt right to tend to something, to believe in a season that hadn't arrived yet. One afternoon, as they sat under the shade of the porch, Ada looked out over the hills, eyes soft, hands resting on her lap. "You ever think we'll have to run again?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He was whittling something, small, careful, a handle for Cal's new slingshot, not because the boy needed it, just because every child deserves something made by hand. Finally, he said, "Not from him, not anymore." "But from life?" she asked. He looked at her, not just at her face, but through it, like he saw the years behind her and the ones ahead. He said, "We don't run now. We stay. We stand. We make it ours." And for the first time she nodded,
not in hope, but in certainty. I think there comes a point after enough hurt, after enough starting over, where you stop looking for perfect. You stop waiting for life to go back to something. Instead, you choose to build something new from what's left. You gather what hasn't been broken beyond repair, and you call that home. Jonas had lost a wife, a child, a future he thought was promised. The war took something in him he never expected to get back. Ada had lost safety, freedom, even her name for a while. She'd been used, passed, threatened, forgotten. But neither of them stayed broken. Because somewhere along the coldest path, they found each other. And not just as savior and saved, not just as survivor and witness, but as people who said, "I see you. I'm still here." It's strange, isn't it, how healing rarely happens in hospitals or heroics. More often it happens over eggs in the morning, or fixing a window that whistles in the wind, or the quiet trust of someone falling asleep while your hands are still working near them. They didn't talk much about the past anymore, not because they had to forget it, but because it no longer ran the story. And when people from town asked who they were to each other, Jonas would just say, "We're kin by choice." Sometimes that's all you need. Cal grew fast that spring. Feet always muddy, face always curious. He started calling Jonas Pa one afternoon when no one was watching. No one corrected him. No one needed to. And Ada bloomed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. You ever seen a tree that almost died in winter sprout blossoms anyway? That's what she looked like. Not fragile, but earned. Not blooming despite the cold, but because of how fiercely she'd weathered it. And Jonas, he learned to laugh again. Not the loud kind, the soft kind that sneaks up on you when you realize the weight you've been carrying is suddenly lighter. One night, after Cal had gone to bed, they sat by the fire. No plans, no stories, just the crackle of wood and the comfort of presence. Ada turned to him and said, "Feels like we've stopped hiding." Jonas smiled. "We have." "No more running?" He shook his head. "No more running." She leaned back in her chair. "Then what now?" He didn't even hesitate. "Now, we keep what we've got." And that's it. That's the ending. Not a grand victory, not a sweeping change. Just a man who lost everything, now holding something worth keeping. A woman once broken, now strong enough to stay soft. And a boy who will grow up knowing safety, not as a secret, but as a birthright. There's no epilogue in this kind of story. No dramatic twist. Just a new season, a warm porch, and 3 people who've learned the rarest truth. You don't need more to be whole, you just need something real to hold on to. And this is what they held. Not fear, not the past, not the ghosts of what might have been, just each other. That, to me, is enough. Maybe more than enough. That is what's worth keeping. Some lives don't need to be decorated, just seen, and chosen again and again to be stayed with. That was Jonas, that was Ada, that was Cal.
And maybe that could be you too.